roses of the sun. Before I begin, before I continue, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land. Okay, back to the other side. Today we know
it's lagging a bit.
Yeah,
it's lagging. I can't concentrate. I'll just speak. Okay. Today we hold our first lecture. We have another 3 to follow in 2026. We are privileged to have Pandora Petrovska here as our speaker today, as we reflect on the lives, strength and experiences of our Macedonian great-grandmothers and how their stories help us better understand ourselves today. There will be a time at the end for questions and discussions, guided by Aneta Ramirez here. Before we begin, just a quick note. There are toilets through that brick door, like there's a doorway there, a brick door. If you go right around, and please have your mobiles on silent throughout this lecture, just to help us as well. Okay, what else was it? To commence and start us off, I'm going to call up Kayla, Kay, who has been singing from a very young age, from around 5 years old, Macedonian music, mind you, and she's, very popular out there with all her songs now, and she's got a few, and she'll even sing one of her own songs at the end. So to start us off, we're going to be singing, correct me if I'm wrong, Kayla, Somaki Sumserodina? Yeah? Beautiful. Yes, Shivan?
We may have to do a bit of a sound check.
Okay, let's try now.
It should be okay.
Should be okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I just watch the choir? Yeah. working in teacher and curriculum development as a principal class officer with the Victorian Department of Education. She has worked with Indigenous language teachers to develop training packages for Aboriginal language reclamation in Victoria. Pandora has completed a PhD, has published 2 biographies and numerous articles. Her research interests include language, oral history, and expository cultural writings about the experiences of Macedonian women. Her fierce advocacy for the protection of our human rights and our Macedonian language show us how the power of knowledge and the courage to refuse attempts of erasure can defeat injustice. Her contributions to our community as a teacher, researcher, academic, and activist are admirable and inspiring. I'm also very proud to share that I am one of many VCE graduates who were taught by Pandora. I learned much from her then, and am happy to say I'm still learning so much from her through our current research. She is my dear friend and comrade, and I'm so pleased to be introducing her to you today. Join me in welcoming Pandora.
For being here today. I'm really honoured to have been asked to present the first series of the first lecture in the series of lectures that are to come, hosted by Nasha, Makedonija. In the 1990s, there were a series of Australian Macedonian conferences held in Melbourne, Perth and Adelaide. Then the Australian Macedonian Human Rights Committee held community forums as well as international academic conferences, and they published books and articles. We were very lucky also to have Politicon Publishing in Sydney, publishing Australian Macedonian authors, and they are now a large repository of stories and essays about Macedonians. In the early years of our community, when it was establishing in Melbourne, there were meetings, and I used to go with my dad in the 1960s to the Sveti Georgi Church, and there were writers and poets and others. So I think that this initiative carries on the tradition long established by our elders. It's an excellent idea to provide a vehicle for another generation to present their research and their ideas. And it's really a fantastic initiative. So let's start with this lecture. Our Bubby used to say, od lošo ima pološo I od pološo ima ušte pološo. There is bad, then worse, then even worse still. So I'm going to take you back 100 years, or more than 100 years, to the first 50 years of the 1900s to understand how we came to be here in Australia. And things did get a lot worse after the Ottoman Empire. This presentation will explore the way in which nationalism genocide, as it's come to be known, impacted the lives of our great-grandmothers, our grandmothers and our mothers. Extreme acts of life force atrocities were experienced by the Macedonian people during the fall of empire and the rise of the nation states, which annexed the Macedonian peninsula. When the powerful decide to take your land, they can, and they do, and this is colonisation all around the world. So, post-Balkan Wars and the many treaties leading to the division of Macedonia and the reassigning of the Ottoman Empire, the 1915 National Geographic magazine describes the largest population movement the world had ever seen. Colonisation had to start from the world up, namely over 1 million immigrants and 1.25 million acres of confiscated estate and transferred lands for colonisation purposes and building a Greek nation. Our grandmothers could tell us about settler colonisation, how it was implemented by talking about the coming of prosfigi families to their villages and the way that they lost their land, which they had purchased from Turkish families who were fleeing after the Ottoman Empire collapsed. They also spoke about the settler violence which resulted in their sons going on Pechalba to the Jara timber forests in Western Australia in order to avoid death or jail, because the settlers had way more rights than the Endopi, or natives as they were called. But they couldn't tell us the way it was coordinated by the League of Nations. For example, in British Foreign Office documents from the Mixed Commission on Greco-Bulgarian Emigration in Western and Central Macedonia, which was led by Colonel A.C. Corfe from New Zealand, 1919. This is where we see the greater powers at work on our grandmother's homeland. So, the power to name. When you go looking for your Macedonian ancestors, you're going to find a lot of labels. Just remember that whoever has the power to name you has the power to define you according to their criteria and needs. In this case, it was empire or nation state. Labelling is a colonising tool to redefine native populations and the land they live on. Like the British when they came to Australia. They changed all the Aboriginal place names to English ones, and now they're being changed back. When the slaves were taken from Africa to America, they had to take on the names of their masters who had purchased them, and they lost their own names. Similarly, Macedonian personal and place names were replaced with those of the colonising nations in their image. So let's have a look at some of the administrative designations or the labels our people have had. And I think it's a lot of labels for one group of people. So under the Ottomans, people were classified as Christian or Muslim. Then came the nation states, and again, people were classified according to the religion and national designation. in British Foreign Office documents, you see Slavic speakers, Slavophone Greeks and so on. Then came the Yugoslav Federation and the People's Republic of Macedonia, and a native nation state was formed. But then came independence in 1991, and the Republic of Macedonia became FYROM, and now it's North Macedonia. So, here are the labels that have been used for the native Macedonian-speaking population. And they're said at that time to have numbered about 2 million, maybe 1.5 million, depending on the commentator. So, where do we find our great-grandmother's footprints? We're going to have a look at some images of them from 100 years ago. But when we go looking for them, we'll find that they have different labels depending on which nation state was created on their homeland and who is writing about them. But if we know their original place name, we know we found them regardless of those labels. So this is a 1914 French postcard of a little girl from Lerin. So they're already using the Hellenised name Florina. But my great-grandmothers and my grandmother made these types of outfits for our mother. And they referred to the campaign d'Orient, which is the First World War. The term Orient refers to a place that's backward or uncivilised, and the Ottoman Empire was considered to be a bit of a backwater. So the following photos are from the National Geographic magazine, and from 1914. And this fellow is a Macedonian Christian peasant, and the author has written, "The picturesque dress of these people is always fascinating to Western eyes." Here, these women are Servian peasant women, and they say there was always a top woman who gave the jobs to the other women. That was the Svekarva, the mother-in-law ruled the roost. And these outfits remind me of Skopski nosi around Skopje, because my sisters used to wear something like that when they danced with Svetlos many years ago. This girl is called a Bulgarian water witch. So she's pretending to collect water, and her outfit is probably from Central Macedonia. And they talk about marriage by capture. So if a young fellow fancied one of these girls, they could just carry them off when they were collecting water, and they'd have to marry them. So we'd call this abduction nowadays. So let's have a look at real girls carrying water. Because there was no plumbing in the houses, no taps, this was women's work, collecting water every day. Here are a group of women doing the washing at the Cheshma, and it's obviously a cold water wash. If you have a look behind them, there's a curved out rock where they would have been scrubbing those clothes, and they made their handmade soap out of the remains of pig fat. So they were still doing this into the 1990s in the villages, and it actually washes really, really well. So here are our women harvesting a wheat field, and they use a sickle and look at the size of the field they have to harvest. So our Bubby have been called portals of mother tongue and the ark of specialised knowledge about their traditional rural way of life, and they have been especially targeted. A 1931 survey of agricultural life around Lerin saw these women as lay experts on religion, rituals, superstitious songs, proverbs, legends, popular wisdom and experience, and other hidden knowledge. They were matriarchs in this society because the menfolk were often away, either conscripted or on pechalba, which is work migration. Okay, let's have a look at Rebecca West. I'm going to share this quote with you, and I think Vesna's produced it on the program that you have. And this comes from a book called Black Lamb, Grey Falcon. West was an English woman travelling through the Balkans in the 1920s and 30s, and she gives us a succinct depiction of the life of Macedonian women earlier this century, and this was during our great-grandmother's time. She is describing a young woman at an Easter midnight mass standing in candlelight. And I just want you to settle into your seats, and I'm going to read you this passage. She was the age that all Macedonian women seemed to become as they ceased to be girls, a weather-beaten 50. There is a dark cloth about her hair and shoulders. This woman has suffered more than most other human beings. She and her forebears have suffered. A competent observer of this countryside has said that every single person born in it before the Great War, and quite a number who were born after it, have faced the prospect of violent death at least once in his or her life. She was born during the calamitous end of Turkish administration, with its cycles of insurrection, massacre, and social chaos. If her village had not been murdered, she had certainly heard of many that had, and had no guarantees that hers would not someday share the same fate. But in her maturity had come the Balkan Wars, then the Great War, with the cholera and typhus epidemics between, and the great poverty. She had far less of anything, of personal possessions, of security, of care in childbirth than any Western woman can imagine. But she had two possessions, which any Western woman might envy. She had strength, the terrible, stony strength of Macedonia. She was begotten and born of stocks who would mock all bullets save those that went through the heart, who could outlive the winters when they were driven into the mountains, who could survive malaria and plague, who could reach old age on a diet of bread and paprika. I'm drawn to this because my mum would say, Baba si makaše pipeca so lepče. And that is why I know the author really saw our grandmothers. She did that so that there'd be more food for the children. So let's explore some international documents which have our grandmother's footprints around the time that Rebecca West was in Macedonia. We're going to talk about nationalism genocide today, and we're going to look at the way communities were destroyed, and we're going to look at how people lost their individual property rights and there was no right of return home. Demographic restructuring and forced assimilation have a dramatic effect on women's lives as they carried the culture and was responsible for their children's survival. If we have a closer look at what genocide scholars say about this, Levine, who's written many, many books on different genocide patterns, he says that the decision to divide the Ottoman Empire into nation states in the 1878 Berlin Congress accelerated conditions in which genocide was likely to be an outcome. And MacArthur has given an estimation based on census data of the number of Muslims killed and Muslim refugees as the Turks were leaving the Macedonian peninsula. They believe that there's an equal number of Christian deaths. So our numbers would be in that Christian death number, but also in the Muslim numbers, because there were a small amount of Macedonians who converted to Islam because they pay less taxes. So much history's been written about the Macedonian question, or problem, meaning we were a problem needing to be solved because our grandmothers were living on land somebody else wanted. Writing was usually in the voice or voices of the powerful empires and nation states who signed a multitude of treaties and agreements amongst themselves for possession of territory. The initial civilian carnage and forced population expulsions were recorded by external observers in the Carnegie Endowment Report on the Balkans, published in 1914. The Carnegie Endowment for Peace was a philanthropic organisation established by a steel magnate in New York. It still exists and sends researchers to war zones like Gaza. It records issues like climate change and food insecurity and so on. Sadly, this is where we find our great grandmother's footprints and the destruction of their villages. So, observers recorded destroyed villages, civilian killings, rapes of women and children. Sadly, no action was ever taken against any of the perpetrators. Rather, the great empires put structures into place that assisted massive population displacement and land dispossession. The appendices of the Carnegie Report also show the cost and business of war and the way in which it was funded, as well as the justification as to the origins of the two Balkan wars and the rivalry for Macedonian territory. The Carnegie Report, however, does call out the great powers' policy on the Balkans, which led to military invasion or zones of influence, and discusses the protection of civilians in warfare, and uses terminology such as war of extermination, deportation, campaign of murder, forced emigration, massacres of prisoners, and violence against women and children, and horrendous living conditions in refugee camps. Historians hold that it was the first instance of a public document attempting to assign responsibility for the massacre of civilians by asking whether the atrocities are committed by officers and soldiers following orders from commanders or armed bandits. It also has letters from soldiers who are writing home, and this is one of them. And this fellow can't even find any paper to write the letter on because they've burnt everything. So, the next part is outraged women. This is the word used to describe rape. And this is what the quote from the report is: widespread and almost universal maltreatment of women and girls by the soldiers of the three nations, left behind moral consequences which cannot be estimated. So the report has names and ages of victims in depositions, and for example, young women from Korčani who died after the outrages, and there are many examples of similar deaths, but no women were spared, regardless of the background. During this time, it's estimated that 40,000 Macedonian-speaking Muslims were forcibly sent to Turkey, even though they might have been Turkish. They'd find themselves as part of a mass expulsion of Turkish Muslim population who feared both the Greeks and the Bulgarians, which the Carnegie report estimates is greater than 200,000. Now, the Carnegie observers were in Macedonia for a very, very short time frame, and they were only able to collect the information that they were able to collect. The report documents them fleeing through Solun, Drama and Kavala in pitiful camps. The Carnegie report reports that over 100,000 find their way to Bulgaria. The report provides a breakdown of those towns and cantons they were settled in. Husbands looking for their wives, parents for children, flocks had been seized, crops abandoned, homes destroyed. The peasant abandoned everything and fled because they did not trust the Greek army with their lives. So let's talk about the population displacement. The depopulation process is first cited in this 1914 report as Greek authorities being determined to dispose of the lands of the fugitive population, and I quote, as though it had wiped out all private property rights. The Carnegie report questions who will acquire the lands left behind and asks what right the Greek authority had to dispose of the lands. In the Kukush region, for example, there were 40 villages razed. In Kukush town, nearly 2,000 houses, large numbers of shops and mills. Observers note that Kukush had over 13,000 inhabitants and there were only 400 left in a Catholic orphanage. The number of villages and houses there listed by village and number, including Turkish villages. So The houses estimated to have been burned by Greek soldiers in this south to north military exercise is about 30,000. There was pillage and plunder of everything, and the English Red Cross was there treating cholera. And we know from our family stories that in some families, almost entire families were wiped out by cholera. The endowment observers also capture the dehumanising language about the people in Macedonia. During this time, nearly 1 million emigrants from the region went to America, and they've got a record of the money being sent home. Now, we have two dedovci who were in America at that time. Dedo Veljen, my dad's uncle, and Dedo Petre, our mother's grandfather. So, here are some of the place names in the report. And I thought it was important just to list some of them. There's a lot more, there's pages and pages of them. Because the report has names that are familiar to us, and because the report also has several labels referring to our people. This includes Bulgarian or Serbian, depending on the school or churches operating in a particular region. But there's a French ethnographic map also, which includes Slavs of Macedonia. And that's as distinct from Bulgarian or Serbs or Albanian, Greeks, and Romanians and Turks. So the categorisation and labelling according to knowable groups of a new nation state is based on known kingdoms, and this had the effect of erasing the native populations like ours. So natives are not a known entity. They are there to be assimilated. So let's have a look what the International Red Cross said. So what happened to the Macedonian Christians who had no alternative but to escape to Bulgaria? This International Red Cross report says that of the 30,000 that escaped to Burgas camp, 65% perished within 2 years of their arrival. And this is described by Lucien Kramer in the Revue Internationale de la Croix-Rouge, November 1925, as follows. When we saw the miserable situation of the refugees in Bulgaria, we thought we were in one of the circles of hell by Dante. This is the real scandal of Europe, which is unbearable. So the date of this is 1925, but this would have started to happen during the Balkan Wars, 1912 and 13. They lacked clean water and food for weeks and froze in the wintry conditions, wearing only the clothes on their back. Diseases like cholera and typhoid appeared. And regarding their settlement, Simovsky 1974 refers to a host of different internal reports and that of the League of Nations and Macedonian philanthropic societies to record what happened to them. Today, we know that for every one direct death as a result of war, the Lancet Public Health Journal 2024 about Palestine and Gaza notes that there are another 5 to 13 indirect deaths as a result of untreated injury, poor sanitation and water, infectious diseases, malnutrition, and the lack of medicine for chronic diseases. Not to mention the psychological impact of war. Trauma metastasizes down the generations, especially the sense of worthlessness and self-hatred that comes with not being able to stop the unspeakable. It takes generations to overcome and is carried transgenerationally. In the eulogies of our Bubby, particularly those in their 90s here in Australia, we know that they had siblings and who died of hunger or illness. Families consisted of stepbrothers and sisters due to mothers and fathers dying at a young age, and children being raised by their extended families and their grandparents. They were called ranenichinya, little ones needing to be fed. Village life was disrupted when livestock and grain were confiscated by incoming armies to feed their troops, and crops perished in the fields because there was nobody to harvest them. So what of the incoming populations? And this is from the British Foreign Office. They estimate 500,000 Greek refugees from Asia Minor were planted in Slavophone, meaning Macedonian villages, and this disrupted life to such an extent that they were forced to emigrate. Simovsky has an estimation of 640 from a French source. So at the time that the Carnegie Report was written, the concept of genocide had not been coined, nor did institutions like the United Nations exist. There is now international consensus and a codified definition of physical genocide in law and the International Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crimes of Genocide. However, Lemkin's initial conceptualisation is important to the Macedonian story because of what is termed cultural genocide, and I think that's a discussion for another day. The term ethnic cleansing came about during the 1990s Yugoslav conflict. So let's have a look at what the Permanent Court of International Justice said. This whole situation resulted in the non-existent status of minorities in Macedonia, and it was formally articulated in 1930 by this court regarding the Greek and Bulgarian treaties. The advice highlights, amongst other things, the dissolution of communities, lost property rights, and no return once people had crossed over the border into another state in supposed voluntary population exchanges. And they continued after the Balkan Wars. But it outlines the importance of minority rights in two ways. Minorities had to be on an equal footing with the majority and be given the opportunity to preserve their culture. In a 1927 dossier from the League of Nations on minority questions in Macedonia, it contains demands from refugees to return to their homes and possessions. And this is what they said, and I quote, "Those that were on Bulgarian soil ought to stay there and be provided for under the Bulgarian loan, and those still remaining in Greece should be afforded protection by the League." So, let's move to the Great War. You could overhear our dedovci, who used to drink coffee and drink rekice and play cards and talk politics in the Macedonian centre at Epi. And they used to say things, "Abe, da ne ti vlezi tuja čizma doma." So what did that mean? You don't want foreign boots on your soil. And I was young then, and I didn't really understand what they were talking about. And I didn't realise that those fellows had probably done military service. So let's explore what Chuji Chismi came to the Macedonian front. The Macedonian front is along the mountain range that separates modern-day Greece and the Republic of Macedonia. It goes from Solun, the sea, right along west to Mount Kejmakchalan and Niđa Planina. It's behind Levin and Vodensko, and it is very steep. On the other side is Mariovo, and that's on the Republic side. So this is a postcard from 1916, and these are the Allied powers. And I'm going to go through and tell you where all these people come from. So these were the Chuji Chismia Dedovci we're talking about. So from right to left, standing up, we have Montenegrin, British, Serbian, Italian, French colonial from Algeria, British colonial India, and Greek. Kneeling, we have French colonial Cochin Chinese, which is a southern region of Vietnam, Russia, French, and French colonial. They fought against the Central Powers, Bulgaria, Germany, Austro-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire during the First World War. So, what do we see here? The use of colonised men as cannon fodder for empires. So, the remaining Australian troops that survived Gallipoli as part of the British-led campaign to further weaken the Ottoman Empire after the establishment of new nations on European Turkey, soil, that is Macedonia, were sent to Solun, to the Solun front, and also to other places in Europe. When you drive through regional Victoria, you'll always see an avenue of honour and trees planted to commemorate these soldiers who lost their lives. In Ballarat, in Sturt Street, it's many, many kilometres long, all the way out of the township right down to Lake Windermere. Australian writer Miles Franklin arrived in Osogovo, Mount Kaymakchalan, to work at the Scottish Women's Hospital. She described the most difficult terrain and trip up the mountains to the front that she'd ever experienced. This field hospital treated mainly Serbian soldiers. Now, if you're from the Republic, they may well have been Macedonian conscripts because they were conscripted by the Serbian army. So Bulgaria, Serbia and Greece used our grandfathers as cannon fodder. One source said up to 100,000. We know that 30,000 Macedonian men formed the 11th Division of the Bulgarian army. So let's have a look at what that front looked like. And this is a photo of 1918 of French and Serbian troops going up the mountains in Mariovo. And you can see the hairpin bends of the road, and they look like ants going up there. In the foreground, you can see pack horses carrying stuff up the mountain. This is an Italian army headquarters in Prilep. There's one Western woman, and I think it's most probably a nurse. So everybody came out for the photo. This is grain being confiscated by the army. If you look at the two chaps in the front, they're just not looking very happy at all. So the women would have harvested it all, they've collected it, and now somebody's come along and taken it. So, this next photo is of my Dedo Lazo Suporma from village Dolna Kleština Lerinsko. He was conscripted into the Greek army during the Great War. He was only 16 when the army came for him. So, and according to him, in his words, those boys that tried to escape were shot. The conscription of our grandfathers meant that our grandmothers were left with the heavy work. So, if our grandfathers survived the Great War in one piece, some didn't. They lost limbs, and there was an international organisation in Lerin that were helping people that had suffered those losses during the war. If they survived in one piece, they were sent to the Greco-Turkish War between 1919 and 1922. That is, they were sent to fight in Turkey. This was the point at which serious migration starts to Australia. My father's uncle and cousin, who'd served in the Great War, being amongst them. So this is Dedo Lazo in his uniform. His infantry was tasked with taking cannons up the mountain on donkeys. One day, his donkey was bombed and killed. Lazo survived. He returned home, married and had a son. By 1927, he came to Australia. 8 years later, he returned to Kleština, collecting his wife, son and father, and they arrived in Werribee South, where they worked as market gardeners. His grandson was the first child christened in the Sveti Georgi Macedonian Orthodox Church in Young Street, Fitzroy. Dedo Lazo threw his war medals in the Werribee River, where he used to go fishing, because he didn't believe that war should be celebrated. His son Jim would be the president of the Preston Makedonija soccer club in the 1970s, and he was responsible for lobbying politicians to get access to a ground for the club, and that's the Broadhurst Avenue in Reservoir, where the club still is. So let's have a look at let's ask the question, what were our Bubby doing? This photo is from a French cemetery museum in Bitola. Now, because so many armies were in Macedonia, there are cemeteries of foreign soldiers all over the place. So this one is on the outskirts of Bitola. I think there's a German one in Pilip, and there are British ones in Solom. So I've included this photo, and it's a very old photo, because I just think it is the image of poverty. Look at the children, look at their faces, look at their clothes, and look at the woman. And I think it's a baba because the children are very close in ages, and normally Bubby would look after all of their grandchildren. So, if you're listening to this, your baba, firstly, was able to give birth without dying during childbirth. She had just enough to eat so that she could feed your ancestor breast milk. If not, she made sure that the armies didn't take her cow, sheep or goat, so she had milk to make popara for her 2-year-old, and cheese to go with lepche that she was able to make. If the fields where she planted were shelled and not contaminated with gas or unexploded ordnance, she could plant beans, potatoes, corn, vegetables to feed her families. She had to hide her grain reserves so that she could make bread, and she could plant wheat for the next season if she managed to plough up the field without bullocks and horses, which may have also been confiscated by the passing armies. The work was heavy and usually done by the men. If there was danger, she made sure she protected her children and took them up the mountain to hide. She had to be self-sufficient in a dangerous war zone. And as a woman, at some stages, she was outnumbered by the number of soldiers in the land. But when the armies had gone, she had to then protect her teenage boys from exploring the front. She didn't want them bringing down weapons, bullets, bombs, unexploded ordnance, and trying to remove their gunpowder and seeing what made them work. She gave them warnings like, don't go up there because you can still hear them crying out, but it didn't work. It didn't stop the boys bringing things down. There were many injuries as a result of this. Some lost their hearing, some lost digits and limbs, and some were killed. So now we're going to get to the Second World War, and we've got more Twiggy Chisme. Just look at that list. And this is swirling around our grandmothers' homes and villages. So there are British troops, there are Australian troops, there are German, Italian and Bulgarian fascist troops. There are the Greek troops of the National Army, there's the Hellenic Gendarmerie, there are paramilitary fascist groups, both Greek and Bulgarian. There are right-wing pro-monarchist groups who are also arming the local population. And there's Communist Party groups and partizani, and on top of all of that, they've got a paid militia of a pro-Serbian monarchist Chetnik group. So, what were our buddy doing? Well, some of them by then had sons and grandsons in Australia, and they encouraged their sons and grandsons who were still in the village to go hide in the mountains as soon as they heard a jeep coming into the village, because they didn't want them to be conscripted, not in the Greek, not in the Bulgarian, and not even in the Communist Army. And of course, they still kept trying to feed their families. They helped their daughters-in-law make dreadful decisions about handing their grandchildren over to strangers. They saw their daughters put on uniforms and learn how to shoot. Some had their grandchildren put into state care because the mothers had lost the right to parenthood as they or somebody from their village joined the partisans. And finally, they saw their people escape over the border with their lives and they left their homes. But the Bubby had to contend with the most devastating time as their families disintegrated. Some families saw one son taken by the Greek army, whilst another one deciding to go with the partisans, and nephews across the border in Bitola being conscripted by the Bulgarians, and you couldn't get out of Bulgarian conscription. And so, yeah, it was really hard. Some men tried to hold on to the guns when the right-wing paramilitary groups handed out guns, and people started to call them pushkari. When the partisans came through recruiting, they would take the guns and say, come on, you're coming with us. And there'd be a political chasm in families and villages which would be irreparable. And then there were the communist groups of partisan fighters fighting alongside the Allies. And I think our people went with them because it was the best of a bad bunch, and they felt that they would have a chance to have minority rights, if not an independent state. So now we're going to talk about fighting women. So one of the most famous victims of the Greek Civil War was a Macedonian woman called Makedonija. There are many songs in our living archive about Makedonija sung about her torture and execution by firing squad by the Greek state in 1946, early in the Civil War. Makedonija was born in 1916 in Rusilo-Vovodensko and is the only woman to be executed by the Greek state for treason. She was sentenced to death as a traitor and an autonomist wanting a free homeland according to Law 509. She was tried in a military tribunal where she vocally denied all charges. She was taken to the Energy Vavra cemetery where she was executed by firing squad with another group of partisans. Her legend has it that she took no blindfold, rather she faced her executors singing a hymn for freedom. She was defiant. The point I wish to make today is that 70 years after her death, YouTube has clips from Aegean Macedonia of young people dancing to her song. This is because this is the way in which we are still processing the collective trauma handed down to us from our great-grandparents. Folk music in trauma-marked cultures functions like community narrative therapy. It is repeatedly traumatised, shared and emotionally metabolising. Our songs are the greatest carriers of cultural memory, and in the above context can be described as a living archive because they're still being sung. When history is painful or contested and you have an oral culture, music becomes the living archive which keeps ancestors and events alive. It records our history. And I want to note here that not everything in our living archive is as sad as this song because it is in the voice of a grieving mother. We have happy songs, we have love songs, we have wedding songs, we have songs about abundance and harvest, and we have, of course, songs about pechalba and separate family separation. But Kayla has very generously learned the words of one of Milka's songs, and she's going to perform it for us today. So I'm just going to invite Kayla to come up, and I don't know whether this messes you around in terms of sorting this out. I'll get out of your way. We have many fighting women in our folklore, like Sirma Vojvoda and about 150 women in the Ilinden insurrection against the Ottomans in 1903. And there were warrior songs in 1800s collections. And I think our women really love a good warrior woman story. So we're going to meet another woman. The Lofozanovsky's collection of 2008 has women's narratives about World War II and the Greek Civil War. It has 10 biographies, including women fighters and the mothers who took responsibility for the child refugees to Eastern Europe. And I just want to acknowledge that here today we actually have some child refugees that were taken and their descendants. So, during the Civil War, Urania Yurokova became a partisan commander, promoted to the rank of captain and vice commissar of the 105th Brigade of the Democratic Army of Greece. She was a leader of the Communist Party of Aegean Macedonia and organisational secretary of the Women's Anti-Fascist Front. Urania survived the Civil War only to be sent to Moscow and assaulted military and political jails in the Soviet Union, as well as an internment camp in eastern Siberia because she was found guilty plotting against the Soviet Union and for being an agent of Yugoslavia and internal imperialism. She denied all of that. This photo was taken when she was released from 2.5 years imprisonment in Moscow. Urania was released in 1956 and finally reunited with her child from Romania in 1958, and the child was taken with the Deca Begalzi. The rank and file partisans, both men and women, were sent to Tashkent in the Soviet Union. Now, her story is really interesting and gives us an insight into those years through women's stories. It shows the effect of geopolitics on ordinary people, namely the deals between Stalin and Churchill and the fallout with Tito. Aegean Macedonia would never be part of an independent state. The borders had been drawn by the more powerful, and that was it. The commanders and fighters were removed far from the homeland so that the group could not reconstitute and continue to fight for homeland. And that is why Urania was jailed. So, this following quote is from her biography, and I think she was a real character. And it recounts a conversation that she had with a British liaison officer and commander in the Lerin region. Captain Patrick Hutchinson Evans was parachuted into Western Macedonia on the 16th of September 1943, and he remained there till October 1944. The captain says, "Urania, I am surprised. In England, we thought that the Slavic element, meaning Macedonians, was totally assimilated after the Great War and that it no longer existed. We thought that the language, the customs were all lost, but wherever I go, all I hear is Macedonian. Nobody speaks Greek." And Urania replies, "Well, you were ill-informed. No nation can be assimilated just like that. And I bet you see she's thinking, "Abre budala ene." So he immediately reports to London, because that's his job. Now, this next extract, and he goes back to London. This next extract is from British Ambassador Leaper to Athens to the British Foreign Office Secretary Eden. Now, Leaper was a key policy architect in Greece at the time. What's important about this is the involvement of greater powers, and the last sentence, which is a direct reference to our villages and people. So, and I haven't got a British accent, but what's really important is to understand the planning that was going on here. So, this is what he says. On the assumption that the policy of His Majesty's government is to treat Greece as the most important Balkan country from the point of view of British interest and to support those elements in Greece which are most stably pro-British, and 2, that Greece does not wish to belong to a Balkan federation in which there is a large Slav majority, that's us, it would appear to follow that Greece had better not contain any Slav minorities at all. So, and since the amputation of the Slav areas in Western Macedonia and their annexation is a practical impossibility, it would also be economically disastrous for Greece, because North Macedonia, northern Greece, is the most fertile food bowl on the Balkans. So, and then he goes on to say, it would follow that, difficult as it may be, a home must be found for perhaps 120,000 Slav Macedonians north of the Greek frontier. So, how do you remove so many people? There are many reasons for the Greek Civil War, such as the intervention by the British, the return of the British monarchy, the Greek monarchy, and according to Yurokova, the reinstatement of many paramilitary, nationalist and royalist units which had collaborated with occupation troops between 1941 and 45. And according to Urania, the environment created terror beyond comprehension and such atrocities that had not been witnessed under Ottoman occupation. This became a catalyst for many women joining the partisans as men, not to mention continued expulsions and massive outmigration from Lerin and Kostur to places like Australia, as well as across the border to the People's Republic of Macedonia within Yugoslavia and other European countries. So not long after the monarchy's return, it resulted in an evacuation program headed by Queen Frederica, and this was started in 1947, and it was called the Paidapoli. So this is the mission statement of the Executive Committee of the Queen's Fund. So they treated children whose parents were partisans as orphans, as they'd forfeited their right to parenthood by betraying the nation. Therefore, they're considered to be dead. Children remained in the homes if both parents A had died, B were not repatriated from government-controlled territory, in other words, in internal exile, and there were concentration camps operating, or they were in prison or sentenced to death as communists or exiled to Eastern Europe. And this is from the Danforth or Schotten book. So, what happened? By 1950, there's an estimated 16,000 to 18,000 children housed in the orphanages. By 1957, there are 27,000, increasing to 50,000 in the 1960s in residential schools. So these homes effectively separated children from their families in order to assimilate them. And this is because the administrators of the Queen's Fund believed that if children from our villages were taught to speak Greek at a very young age, then this barbarous mix of dialects would certainly disappear. Okay. Often, when younger children returned home, they'd lost their mother tongue and couldn't communicate with their families. The notion was promoted that the Queen was the good mother providing for the children, whilst their own mothers were bad mothers because they'd left their children starving, dirty, flea-ridden, because the mothers couldn't provide for them in a war zone. So in first-hand accounts in the Lafazanovsky collection, Evdokia Foteva says, we see examples of women beating up policemen who'd come to take their children to the Queen's Children's Home in Županishta, Kostutsky region, or by hiding them in furnaces, cauldrons, stables, hay in the village of Priolishta. So let's talk about these bad mothers who gave up their children to save them from napalm bombs after the Americans tutored the Hellenic Air Force to fly Helldivers and Spitfire planes provided by Britain and America. So according to an American Aerospace Studies Institute Concept Division report on the employment of air power in the Greek guerrilla war, 288 tonnes of bombs, including napalm, were dropped in the northwest region of Aegean Macedonia to destroy pro-communist forces. The report holds that without air assaults, the loyalist Greek national military could not overpower the guerrilla forces that found refuge in mountain villages, as the geography in the northern border favoured guerrilla warfare. It provides extensive data about the dates and the numbers of bombings between 1948 and 49, and it includes 114 napalm strikes. So let's see what napalm does. It was designed at Harvard, in a Harvard laboratory in 1942, and its use on civilian populations was banned by the United Nations in 1980. Its use in Macedonia on Macedonian civilians barely rates a mention. It was used in the Vietnam and Korean wars. It burns at up to 1200 degrees centigrade, and it draws oxygen from the air, resulting in asphyxiation and suffocation. Pilots were taught to drop bombs at tree height to be most effective. Once it sticks to the skin, it can't be removed. Full degree burns. So, the local population experienced this as follows. Urania Europova's account details the first napalm assaults on Vicho, Gramos, Bigla and Prespa, along with a mass exodus of Macedonians who survived via Nivici, where the recent Prespa agreement was signed. There are estimates of between 60,000 and 100,000 displaced Macedonian population as a result of the civil war. The offensive on Gramos started in June 48 and lasted 3 months. And Urania was injured in August. And in her words, she says, "Although my leg was broken, I just would not let go of the machine gun until she passed out." Another account notes the way villagers hid in their cellars during the bombing raids. One day when they emerged, they noticed the rocks burning on the mountain and a type of fire they'd never seen before. And the only thing I could imagine it as, it's like a lithium fire. It's really hot. And that's the point at which they thought, okay, we've got to do something about the kids now. And I'm referring here to what become known as the child refugees. So, let's talk about the mothers. This following extract is from Lena Dukatovska, and it's a mother's account of leaving her child to be taken by the child refugees. This is a biography, their biography, Stefan and Lena Dukatovsky's biography, entitled Picture on the Mantelpiece, and it is an extract from that. After leaving the child with the child to be taken with the child refugees, Lena was taken by the partisans because her husband Stefan had joined them. She didn't want to go because she was leaving her 2-year-old, and she tried taking him with her, only to return him to her mother-in-law in the village when she couldn't look after him properly. And this is what she says. "Which child do you choose? Which do you give up? It's like deciding which finger to cut off. How do you decide?" Life was to deal her a situation where she had to give up her children in order to save them, and her choice was made in accordance with age. Vasil was older and she felt better able to make the journey. Lazar was only 2 and Vasil 5. What a choice for a mother to make. How old is 5? How brave is a 5-year-old? How can he do without his mother? But as the village began to be shelled, there was no place to hide, and Lena felt she had no choice. And anyway, what sort of mother keeps a child with her if she knows they're going to be in desperate danger? Taking the little boy's hand, Lena could only imagine the journey he'd be taking. During a chilly spring evening in 1948, Lena tracked to the fields on the outskirts of the village where the children bleated like lambs for their mothers, and that's a direct quote from her. Dецата блеа ко јагнца по мајките. It was chaos. Some women tearfully screamed, "Take us with you, take the mothers and the children, take us across the border, then we'll come back together with our children. How can you look after so many children? Let us come along also. Children need their mothers." So the question that I'd like to know the answer to is, why didn't they take the mothers with? And who was making these decisions that affected our women's lives so incredibly? Now, the last thing we need to talk about is collective punishment. Why were so many women and children incarcerated during this time? They weren't fighters, just ordinary women who remained in the villages whilst their husbands and sons were in Australia, or on the front lines, or sometimes conscripted. So, why? According to Yurokova, the prisons were crowded. Many pregnant women gave birth in the prisons. So people fleeing to the mountains, she says, that's how the first purely Macedonian units were created in Aegean Macedonia. So let's go back to the original question. How do you complete the dissolution of communities? Well, exactly like this. Destroying the family unit, and by enacting the following laws, which also put into place supporting the depopulation project between 1948 and 1982. So it continues from 1912. Under this legislation, nearly 500,000 more acres of land was confiscated, and more than 20,000 political refugees were deprived of their citizenship. The compilation of village data by Simovsky in 1978 is very important in this context. His book, The Inhabited Places of Aegean Macedonia, he uses census data over the years to track the populations and what happened in every village in Aegean Macedonia, and it is an amazing document. So how did we deal with all of this? So let's talk about grief. How did our Bubby deal with the trauma and the grief with what was happening around them? How did our people deal with this upheaval? Translated by Faye Tomev, a Melbourne woman, from the Tsepengov collection 1800s, her book Otherworldly Tales, collected in 19th century Macedonia, includes a lot of information about death rituals and the ways of healing illnesses. It includes ethnographic photos housed in the University of Massachusetts Library by Joseph Obrebsky from 1905, and it shows a very, very strong women's culture. This is where the coping strategies to deal with life's terror, grief, and finally acceptance reside. So let's have a look at one of those photos. These are village medicine women from Volcha in Macedonia, and that's in the southeast corner of the Republic. So these women were called upon to help with child labour and to help prepare the dead for burial. So our Bubby believed that when a woman gives birth, she has 1 foot on earth and 1 foot in the other world to receive the new soul. And the medicine woman had to make sure she brought her back to earth safely, and that she didn't lose either the baby or the mother. There were many deaths in childbirth. They also prepared the dead for burial to go to the other world. They helped grieving families. So when our mother passed away just before COVID, we met, she helped us with her funeral. She helped us with the Macedonian rituals, and she is a descendant, a direct descendant of a line of village medicine women from Bulf. Her great-grandmother did this work. So the medicine women had a knowledge bank which was passed down the generations, and they understood traditional medicine, the healing properties of plants and herbs, for teas and medicine, and how to make poultice to draw out infection. They also understood they needed to heal uplaf, or trauma. And here's an example of one of their plants. It's called zdravets, and it's a ground cover pelargonium. It's like a geranium. So why do they call it a pelargonium? Because it's a native of Pelagonia. The root and leaves are used to treat insomnia, hypertension, emotional distress, and it's also highly antibacterial. And this is why we know our bubby were the portals of specialised knowledge. They experienced the fraying of their extended families, long separations from loved ones, and sometimes the impossibility of ever reuniting. They lived the dissolution of their communities, followed by their own invisibility, all aimed at the destruction of this group. And now we see the appropriation of their culture. Well, we will never know the exact number of people who lost their lives and are buried in mass graves in Macedonia. For example, our Dedo Petre is in one of those mass graves near Neoleni, and we don't know where that is. For example, also, at the end of the Civil War, bulldozers dug a pit on the outskirts of Lerin near the Sveti Georgi church, and this is known as the pit, where 500 dead partisans lie. The Lafazanovsky's collection say it's more like 700. No names, just human refuse. But we do know that in our families whose names are still being commemorated, we know we had Dedo Petre. And this is by the death remembrances and the giving of wheat and bread. The lack of knowledge is now compounded by the destruction of archives in Greece of security files on individuals, some 17 million, after the law on the abolition of the consequences of the Civil War was passed in 1989. This destroys all records of deaths, tortures and incarcerations, and there is sometimes an inability to articulate this in places of migration. So now I'm going to introduce you to our great-grandmother, Baba Tsveta, and she was a firecracker. This photo was taken in the 1950s when Baba Tsveta came to Australia to reunite with her sons and their families. And I'm really glad I got to meet her as a little girl. My grandmothers understood the world in the context of the land they worked with a physical strength comparable to their menfolk. Their labour was the core of cottage industry, produce they traded. Baba Tsveta was an artisan cheesemaker. Their lives were profoundly affected by nation building, which led them to leave all that was familiar. They left the confines of the Signor markers. Signor is your border, where you live, your boundary. And these bore old sun signs and different hieroglyphics. They were usually large rocks. And they headed for industrialised urban places of migration in the West, but they still desperately tried to hold on to the defining traditions which were part of them, and they faced another assimilation process when they migrated in Australia. But Baba Tsveta refused to leave her land when her husband Petre begged her to migrate to America with her family in the 1920s. She said, no, I'm not going to leave my land, and I will not leave my ruo. And that's an old word meaning her outfit, her dowry, everything that she had handmade. She was saying, I will not leave my culture. And they stayed. And they bought land for gold Napoleoni from the fleeing Turkish population from around Kleshtina. And even though they had a title, it was confiscated and it left them impoverished until Petre started a mill. This was the woman who threw her granddaughter's Greek books in the fire when the child would come home in tears after being beaten for speaking Macedonian and told she had no real language anyway. Once Baba Tsveta had recomposed herself, because she did get angry very easily, she would say Maikina. She called her Maikina. Maikina, čekaj baba da ti kaži. Tsveta taught her that she was enough. just the way she was, and that she had everything she could possibly need. There was nothing that school could teach her. She had her ruo, she had her culture with ancient stitches and patterns. She had stories and songs, and she knew all the place names in her señor, the little spring, the rocky outcrops, the flat pastures, the riverbed. This was the best gift Sveta could have given her granddaughter, a sense that her language and culture were worth something and that she was worth something. She said, "Ti chinish." This is why, this is what we were taught by our mother. And we have our great-grandmother to thank for that. And this is why I can stand before you today and talk about our Macedonian women's business, because it cuts through the narratives of nationalism, of ideology, of genocide denial, because it is srshta. Srshta means the heart of the grain, but here it means the heart of our being and what being a Macedonian woman is about. It is about a carrier of our culture. In 2027, it is 100 years since Baba Sveta's son Spaset first came to Australia. She now has 5 generations of children here. And I dedicate this lecture to my Baba Sveta and the many, many Babi like her around the world, because they matter, because what happens to them matters, because theirs is a story of survival and the ability to continue, one foot in front of the other. And by understanding this story, we'll be able to see the continued destruction of communities when we see it on TV, like Lebanon, that's happening now, Gaza, and let's not talk about the Sudan. And so that we have compassion for those who can never go home. So why is it important that we understand this? And I'm going to start concluding here. So that we understand that nationalism genocide is perpetual, meaning that it doesn't stop, that its consolidation continues 100 years past the original crimes, and as does ongoing cultural appropriation. So, and this happens all around the world. It doesn't stop, because the people who have your land and your culture want to hold on to it. So we need to understand this so that we understand the purpose and the violation of the Prespa Agreement. The 2018 Prespa Agreement between Greece and Macedonia is about geopolitics by the more powerful and NATO membership. It has the imprimatur of the UN, and it led to the state name change of North Macedonia, and it's very complex. And what I would like to see this lecture series do is invite an international law expert to actually delve into the staggered and difficult UN recognition of the native state of Macedonians and how this has led to another name change. Remember when we were talking about the labels earlier on? Well, it's still going on. But let's look at Article 7.2, because that's relevant to Baba Sveta. So it means that there's no recognition that minorities actually ever existed. So according to this agreement, it means that Baba and her culture were always Hellenic from ancient times. Here also, the colonisers become Macedonians, and the native Macedonians have restrictions on using Macedonian as their self-identification and linking themselves to their land. And this is what genocide denial looks like at the end of the process. So remembering our Babi in their homeland and their culture, which was passed down from their Babi and their Babi before them, not taught in any school, is important for the descendants because unresolved trauma moments continue in conversations by younger generations in emigre communities around the world. This has already shown to have implications for future generations of Macedonians because violent pasts actually need to be reconciled and long-term genocide or intent understood, such as why carrying a cultural symbol like Kutlesh Sun has become problematic for dancing groups at Mumba, or even using the word Macedonian to identify yourself. Sadly, younger generations don't really know about the divided parts of Macedonia and that there once lived a vibrant and proud Macedonian-speaking population. That's because trauma is hard to speak about, and our elders tried to protect us from that knowledge. But here's the thing. If you have a Macedonian Baba, you are truly lucky. You've inherited her resilience gene. Just know that when life gets really, really tough, all you have to do is dig deep and you'll find that same stony strength of Macedonia that Rebecca West saw. It's within you and nobody can take it away from you. Thank you for listening to me.
Nasha. Hey, Nasha.
Excuse me, Anita. Can you speak up a little bit, Anita?
Yeah. I said Ova Baba and Nasha.
Yes.
Yeah. Storytelling is potent resistance to attempts to silence and erase our history. We all have a responsibility to protect our history, our identity and culture by sharing our stories with each other like we have today. And importantly, with the broader Australian community. At the moment, we are underrepresented in our broader community, and many non-Macedonians don't have an accurate understanding of our story. This needs to change. So, tell your stories. Tell your stories everywhere. Ne samo među nas, suscite. With this, I'd like to call on the founder of Nasha Makedonija, to come and share a story about his grandmother. And then we'd love to offer you the chance to share some of your memories. Shivan, tell us about your Baba.
Well, look, how long have you got, folks? My Baba was my hero. I slept between my Baba and Dedo until I was 5 years old. We left Australia, we escaped to come to Australia before my Baba turned up. When she came, I slept in their room until I was 14. If I ever needed anything, if I needed money or to be protected from my father's wrath, it was Baba Velika. So I could go on, but there's one story I've got to tell you about Baba Velika. Baba Velika's sister got married south of the border, or Kalesnica. Kalesnica is a very strong Grko-Mansko cell. So when my Baba arrived in 1959, her sister, her elder sister, called her in because my dad was a troublemaker like me. He fought for human rights for the Macedonian people. And she said to her, "Sestro, kaži mu na sin ti Vasil da ne pravi bela." Вие сте Сърби, ние сме Гърци. My Baba said, because she had great respect, for her older sister. She said, Dobro ли пълно, ама не може да разберам како може две жени, две сестри од една мајка и исти татко, едната биде, не, така треба. So that was our experience in Shepparton, folks, and I'm sure those of you from Makedonija and those of you like me close to the border who have extensive relations from Makedonija would have heard that nonsense before. So my commitment is because of Baba. It's not because of Alexander, I'll be honest with you folks. My link with Alexander is through a book. My link with Baba is falling asleep in her arms. So that's why I wanted Pandora to speak about Babi today, because according to one of my 20th century heroes, founder of modern China, he said women hold up half the sky. I believe he was wrong. I think women hold up more than half the sky. But we men sometimes forget it. Now, there's another thing that I wanted to say, folks. Now, I wasn't going to say this, but Netta put me on the spot. What I wanted to talk about was Nasha Makedonija. We're a human rights charity. We're not a political organisation. That means regardless of your particular politics, doesn't have to be like mine, radical or anything. If you're a Macedonian and you believe in the need for an organisation to protect our human rights going forward, an organisation that will protect our human rights through celebrating our culture, and at the end of this year or early next year we will be having a celebration, educating our people to inspire and make them commit. Now, the final thing I want to say, folks, was money talks and the other thing walks. I won't say it. We don't want to charge money for education, but we as an organisation need money to do all kinds of stuff. Now, what we do is we have sausage sizzles, but that's not enough. And if you can find it in your hearts to donate anything, $5, $10, $20, I don't like asking for money, but someone's got to do it. So we need members and we need money. And also we need other people to come in and join our committee. Now, I want to thank our committee, Vesna, Aneta, Blagoja, Ordan, I've forgotten someone, I know. Yes, these two. This one here, she's been with me since the very start of Nasha Makedonija 6 years ago. And there's another lady here who I'm delighted has turned out today. We need members. We need finance to push our human rights and to defend our human rights. So it's up to you folks. We can't do it alone. No one can do it alone. But our people united will never be defeated. Thank you. Going out, folks.
Wait.
Please.
1 second. Just can I get something? Just pause.
We also have one more song, yes?
Kayla needs to sing one more song.
Here, donations here. Donations. Thank you. We're also an equal opportunity employer. Men and women, not just women.
Kayla, please. The last song. Thank you so much for coming today.
I haven't finished. Ostare, sedam dispet godini, sve juni. I want to thank Kayla for coming here and doing what she did. And I want to thank Pandora. Pandora, thank you for.
You're very welcome.
And most of all, I want to thank everybody who came here. Because without you, this wouldn't be an event. This would just be us talking to each other. You are as important as Pandora, as everybody else. Because we're all Macedonians. And we must not forget that our struggle didn't finish when our republic was created. In fact, I believe our struggle is going to get more and more important. I think that there's going to be an attempt to change our name or do something, and I don't want that to happen. I grew up, I was one of the first generation to be born legally in Macedonia. My father was a Serb, my grandparents were Turkish Ottoman. So that's the story of Macedonia. Please help.
Before Kayla comes up, also we want to thank Jeremy for filming this today.
Yes.
So this is your song, correct? Yes. And if you want to announce the words, there's not on this here, there's
Hello? Lastly, I'll be singing my song. It's called Sila Nisete. It's echo. But yeah, I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank all to stay and to continue the conversation. Yeah, thanks again. Thank you.